We're continuing our patrol of the Federation territory by making a quick stop at the core worlds, beginning with the Sol system. There are several missions that begin at Starfleet headquarters on Earth, and the space log is a check-in point for many other duties, which I won't cover in this episode, but the Sol system is always busy, with comings and goings of hundreds of vessels of numerous origins, and each ship its own captain, crew, and legacy. Nevertheless, we have spent enough time around Earth as it is. The adventure is out there. The sector of space that has Earth residing in it is known as Sector 001, but also the Vulcan sector. This is because, aside from Vulcan being right next door to Earth, a lot of the star charts that the Federation was built off were inherited from the Vulcans. Our first stop, however, is the Baton system. The first terrestrial planet of the system is mostly habitable, but has some trace amounts of xenon in the atmosphere, which make it uncomfortable to breathe. As there are more promising M-class worlds to settle, this one has sort of slipped under the radar somewhat, although it has its own colonists, which are drawn by the deposits of pergium across its surface, which has led to numerous mining settlements cropping up. We are here today because those mines have halted production, and we're here to talk to Chief Brian Vanderberg, the overseer of this colony, as to why. As we enter the system, Ops notes we are being hailed by him, and he pops up on screen. He requests that we beam down to meet him, although he cites a number of issues that are plaguing the colony, and production will not restart until we agree to fix them. Colonies like this crop up all over the place, wherever there is a resource to be gathered. This particular one is a Federation-founded colony, meaning its citizens are our responsibility to take care of. So we close into transporter distance and beam down. The atmosphere is murky and roiling above us, while the town is dry and dusty, with sparse flora and almost no fauna. Pergium, the mineral that is primarily being mined here, is often used as a source of power for certain reactors. We can see that there are crates of the stuff shipped up and ready to go, but they're not moving. So, let's see what we can do to get this place back up and running then. We talk to the chief, who then basically tells us to go and talk to the rest of the colonists to get a sense of what people's feelings are and that they feel completely overlooked by the Federation. To the south, we can find 3 miners. We speak to them to hear their grievances. Perry is concerned at the lack of security in the system and particularly the threat of Orion pirates. Samantha complains that the tools being used here are antiquated and no longer usable, they need new ones. While Prohaska is basically concerned that they'll all be replaced by holograms. After all, holograms do not need to eat, sleep, and can work around the clock. To the north we have a Mr. Joe Hadley, who is complaining that the holodeck is down and needs repairing. On top of that, he says that their library is poorly stocked. Next to him is Leslie, who simply complains that there's just not enough staff and that they're working 10 to 12 hour shifts in the mines, which can be dangerous. With more people, they could cut back to 8 hours. Their plight overheard, we return to Chief Vanderberg, and we basically then have to answer his questions correctly as to what the colonists wanted. This whole situation seems to have been devised by him to be basically a little test to make sure we were paying attention and not just sent here to feign interest. Once we have shown that we were actually listening, we're free to leave. We can compile our report and send on information. We're not here to address all these problems immediately, just to make sure that they do get heard. With that, we leave this system behind us and head on to the next, Andoria. Andoria, along with Vulcan, Earth and Tellar, is one of the 4 original founding member worlds of the Federation. There are no missions or objectives to accomplish on Andoria. However, if we beam down to the surface, we can visit their national park. There are several guides dotted around that all relay the same information. They explain how, in this particular reserve, the Andorian cultural duel, known as the Ushan, is still practiced here. 2 opponents arm themselves with the Andorian ice picks, known as the Ushantor, and fight until one is defeated. In times past, it was to the death. Effectively, this is one of the only few areas in Federation space where any sort of dueling like this is actually legal. Because of this, it has seen many visitors approach to take part in various forms of Ushan, which now in the modern day no longer need to be conducted with ice picks, but can be done with any weapon. With no opponents nearby, and no frank desire to fight to the death, we leave the system and move on to our next destination, that of another founding member world, Vulcan. On the way out, however, it's worth noting that Andoria orbits the stars of the Procyon system, as in the Battle of Procyon 5 that will take place here as part of the Temporal War in the far future. We beam down to Vulcan and find that although our presence was not requested, there is a matter with which we can assist. Ambassador Tosawa informs us that there is a visiting Romulan dignitary, one Ambassador Jirok, that has arrived for a meeting far earlier than expected, and the other delegates are not ready yet. She asks that we speak to him to provide him with the welcome he asked for, and that he can be found by the memorial fountain in the square. We travel down the steps to meet with him, taking a moment to read the memorial to Ambassador Spock. Now, the game doesn't refer to him specifically as a ambassador of the Star Empire, but judging by his attire, he very well seems to be. We tell him we are here to address his concerns and provide the additional security he asked for, and in typical Romulan fashion, he snides, chides and insults us. However, as we are talking to Jirok and preparing to give him the guided tour of Vulcan, his assistant Lieutenant Hemmick chimes in that they've just received a communication from an unknown source, and it is a death threat. Naturally, the ambassador does not take this well, and is on the cusp of leaving when we ask him to wait, and convince him to let us investigate the origin of this threat whilst we provide him with more security. We beam down 2 officers from the Armiger to watch over him, while we ourselves look over this death threat that was sent. Ambassador, before the Romulans founded an empire on Romulus, they were known as the Vatosh Couture. For even that long ago time, the Vatosh Couture were Vulcans and lived among us as kinsmen. In this time, there were many wars. The sands of Vulcan's forge were emerald with the blood of the fallen, while most on Vulcan see the sins of the past as brutalities that are best forgotten. I know better. My heart burns for vengeance. Your ancestors committed an unspeakable atrocity that forever changed my world. I remember your people's crimes and I will make you pay. Your ancestors rejected the teachings of Surak. They closed their eyes to the time of awakening. They chose to march beneath the raptor's wings. They chose emotions and conquest over logic and peace. I cannot forgive them or you. But your ancestors did more than reject logic. They used their gifts of the mind to burn the blood of their enemies. Thousands, including our beloved father Surak, were killed with a thought. How can you defend yourself against a weapon that you cannot see or touch? Surak's Katra was lost to us because of this cowardly act. We do not even have a whisper of his spirit to guide us. For that there must be revenge. I do not have the killing gifts, but my blade should be enough. I will spill your blood upon the sands, and pray that the spirit of Surak will accept this sacrifice. I do not wish to cause you undue pain. However, it is logical that those who commit a crime must be punished. Because there is no greater crime than this, there can be no greater punishment. Yours sincerely, a crazy Vulcan, maybe. We return to Tosawa to report the incident and assure her we are on the case. We show her the note that Jirok received, and she notices several mistakes. Let me know if you spotted any when I was reading through that. I did notice several. But they are historical inaccuracies that lead her to suspect it was written by someone not familiar with Vulcan's history, possibly not even a Vulcan. However, simply denying it was even written by a Vulcan to the ambassador is probably not going to win him over. We need proof, so our first objective is to gather the actual historical records pertinent to this threat and disprove it as being written by a Vulcan's hand. If we have any further questions, we can speak to Jabok, her aide. We can speak to a lot of the historians around Vulcan, but only a few of them are actually pertinent to this note. The first historian, found on the steps, tells us that atomic weapons were developed at the end of the Sundering, which led to the radiation poisoning of Surak on Mount Saleya. He was not killed with mind weapons. The next historian is found to the right of the staircase, and says that before the division that split the Romulans and Vulcans, the Romulans were known as those who marched beneath the Raptor's wings. The next historian can be found on the other side of the fountain where the Ambassador Jirok is, and tells us of the history of the Vatosh Couture. The Vatosh Couture is just a term used to refer to Vulcans who don't follow logic, not necessarily the Romulans, and certainly not those who marched beneath the Raptor's wings. The final historian can be found at the top of the Vulcan shrine on the peak of the nearby stone edifice, as she is overlooking the halls, and speaking to her recounts the history of Surak's Katra, which did survive his death. In fact, it was discovered again within a Catric arc in 2137, his memory patterns and mind preserved for thousands of years and incorporated into Siren, who then founded the Sirenite movement to restore Surak's original teachings. She goes on to state that after passing through Jonathan Archer's head as well as some other priests, his Katra actually now resides back within an arc in the Hall of Memories on Mount Solea. It is not lost to the Vulcan people, as that death threat makes out. With all those tales gathered, we present the evidence, which is easily verifiable now, to Ambassador Jirok, and manage to convince him that the letter was not penned by a Vulcan's hand. It is enough to convince him to stay for a bit longer. However, he is not comfortable when there is still someone down here that seems to want him dead. Hemmick, his assistant, still wants him to leave, which I guess is understandable, but just then we receive a communications from the Armiger saying that they've just been tipped off that it is in fact Hemmick who wants the ambassador dead. For now, we play it cool. This tip-off was sent anonymously, so we need to verify it first, and we have the idea to compare it with the original threats that the ambassador received. An analysis of the signal wave it was sent on reveals that it was actually tied to Jobok's console, Vulcan Ambassador Tosawa's assistant. And so was the death threat. Jobok's family are direct descendants of Surak. Possibly a motive, although it seems a fairly long-lived grudge if that was the case. Analysis of the writing styles reveals them to be rather similar, but there are spelling mistakes. The Vulcan word plaque is misspelt, and it is a word that is generally not misspelt amid Vulcans. The fact, however, that the tip-off was correct suggests that the tip may have been sent by a native Vulcan speaker, yet the original threat was not, but they both came from Jobok's console. We return to speak with Jobok, the aide, and accuse him of being involved, but he blusters and threatens to report us for slander, as well as accidentally mentioning Hemmick's name, which we didn't tell him yet. He does admit that anyone could have sent the messages from his console. We mention his heritage as possible motive, and he deflects that too. If we have enough evidence gathered against him, we can tell him that this is his last chance to do the right thing, and that little bit of pressure proves to be enough, and he eventually fesses up. Turns out, this all comes from a deep-seated belief that the Romulans will destroy Vulcan in the same way their own scheming destroyed Romulus. He's set that continued negotiations with them, especially those concerning unification, will only bring death and destruction. What's more, he said he was the one that sent the tip-off, and the fact he was working with Hemmick to sabotage these negotiations. In fact, it was Hemmick that sent the original death threat. With Aide Jobok's confession under our belt, we finally have enough to confront Lieutenant Hemmick with the truth. At first he denies it, but we just simply tell him that Jobok has already confessed to his part of the scheme, implicating Hemmick, and now we have all the evidence we need. Ambassador Jirok is not exactly happy with the outcome, but nonetheless satisfied. We did our part and proved that we can uphold his safety while he's here. He is willing to stay. However, Lieutenant Hemmick is a Romulan citizen and will be dealt with by the Star Empire. As for Lieutenant Hemmick's motivation, it seems to be quite simply good old-fashioned Romulan xenophobia. The Vulcans are to be crushed and conquered, not worked with. Ambassador Jirok, however, finishes up by telling us he will stay to conclude the negotiations as planned, and thanks us, sort of, for our involvement. We're free to return to Ambassador Tosawa and tell her we're done. For our acts, we get a diplomatic commendation, isn't that lovely? And Jobok himself will also face punishment, but that's not ours to dish out. We depart the Vulcan system with that mission behind us and swing by the Delta Volanus star cluster. This is a relatively unexplored area, surprisingly close to the core of Federation territory, but is rapidly being colonised and settled. Our next system is Pico 2, which was only recently identified as having aquatic lifeforms on the surface. The Federation, however, has been here for a while, mining the planet's ring system for dilithium and deuterium, everything a starship needs to warp around the galaxy. However, we have just picked up a mayday, so we swing by to investigate and see if we can offer our assistance. We circle the planet and find a drifting cargo vessel, yet one that seems operational in most regards, so what exactly is the problem? We hail them to find out. Turns out a brief mining accident has taken out their sensors. They need to be guided back to the station, a safe point, as they can only detect things within 3 kilometers. And if they went by themselves, they're worried, well, basically they'll crash into something in the ring system. So they follow us. Literally, that's it. An escort mission. We just turn up and we guide them to the station. There were no hidden ships, no ambushes, no warp core breaches or catastrophes. We just led them to safety and that was that. Crisis averted. The captain thanks us, tells us he's got it from here now that they're back at port, and we're free to leave. Before we do, we circle the planet because I see something interesting in the ring belt, and it proves to be another dilithium mine installation. We leave the system and head to the next one on our list, Deneva. Now here we have a starbase within the system which I believe is Starbase 10. Deneva as a system is mostly a Federation shipping lane, but it also saw an infection of neural parasites in 2267, where among the dead was Kirk's brother, George Samuel Kirk. The Raytan system is home to a Federation outpost on the desert planet of Raytan 1, but the theta radiation around that planet blocks subspace transmissions, so there are numerous relay towers to compensate in orbit. Now, we are in the Orion sector, so it should not be surprising to discover that Orion privateers have actually hijacked satellites for their own ends. They're attempting to eavesdrop on Federation communications. Now we must drive them out of the system and secure it once more. We do so with force, and there are 5 satellites to secure. This mission takes some time due to the battles, but it's not very complicated. Once all 5 squadrons have been defeated, we're free to leave. We pass through the Pollux system, which has nothing for us at the moment, and move on to the Kinyar system, which does have a repeatable patrol mission. However, it is the 9th rule mission, as seen in the STOSS episode 152, so I won't be covering it again here. So we make speed to the Corridon system instead. This system has had a long history with the United Federation of Planets, eventually being admitted as part of the Babel Conference in 2268. The last system on our patrol is the Una system. This system is home to a Federation colony made up of people who prefer a more agrarian lifestyle, shunning replicators and such advanced tech. However, there is a Starfleet supply station in orbit so that passing vessels can do so without having to make planet-side trips. Unfortunately, there are cloaked Klingon ships in orbit shadowing our satellites, laying in ambush. We've detected them, but are going to play like we haven't, so that they attempt to launch their ambushes and hopefully find themselves outmatched by the Armiger. As before with the Orion patrols, this time Klingons, there are 5 to deal with. At this stage of the game, in my playthrough, we are now at peace with the Klingon Empire. However, there has been the recent uprising and civil war, and there are going to be some houses that are not exactly happy with the way things are, so these are probably rogue Klingon elements. You'll notice that a lot of the chapters of Star Trek Online tend to end with us making peace with the Allies in some form or another, except for maybe that one group of them over there that's not exactly happy with things. It happened with the Iconians, it happened with the Klingons, it happens with the Nakul, and so on. This is basically because there are still missions and patrols and such out there against such factions, and Star Trek Online needs to preserve some form of linearity to their storyline so they can still go, hey, you know what, we're at peace with the Klingons, but there are still some Klingon bad guys to deal with. But with that explosive finale, that ties up all the patrol missions in the local systems of the Vulcan sector and the Orion, as well as a fairly interesting side mission on Vulcan itself. I've been Rick, thanks for watching this episode of the Star Trek Online story series, the patrol side missions, and until the next one, thanks again, and goodbye.